I like that song for the number of different, gods that are presented. And some of you may know this, but Greta Gerwig, the film director, she did Barbie and she did Lady Bird. She grew up in the Unitarian Universalist Church of Sacramento and identifies as a Unitarian Universalist. And she shared that one time she was talking to her father and said, "How would you define Unitarian Universalism?" And he said, "Well, it's a religion that you can believe at most one God." And I thought that was an interesting thing, at one God. I'm not sure I even agree with that, because I think we can actually believe in many gods. In my life, I've gone through a belief, I've been an atheist, believed in many gods, and now, as most of you probably know, you've listened to me long enough for the last 4 years, God is love, is my understanding. But I remember one time when I was a teenager, I grew up in west of Scotland with a lot of Protestant Catholic bigotry. And someone asked me, "What religion are you?" And I thought I was being cleverly diplomatic by saying, "I'm an atheist." And he said, "Yes, but whose God don't you believe in?" Even atheists suffered bigotry in Scotland. Whose God don't you believe in? But I think we have, one of the unique aspects of Unitarian Universalism, a lot of our ethics, other religions, liberal Christian religion, Buddhists, share. But I think the idea of pluralism is something, this idea of many paths, many beliefs, is something, if not quite unique, it's rarer amongst religion. Because if you look at one of the most prominent things that were about the Jewish religion, like 3,000 years ago, was this idea of monotheism. In the Hebrew scriptures it said, "You shall have no other God than me." And that was the covenant between the Jewish people. And of course, in the Christian tradition, there's the idea of, "You'll come through the Father, through me," said Jesus. So there was a kind of exclusive element to both Judeo-Christian traditions, and many other of the major religions have this kind of lack of pluralism, that this kind of idea that they have the one answer. The one of the big exceptions to that in major religion is Hinduism. They have this many manifestations of the one God, but many manifestations of it. And it's not a coincidence that the Transcendentalists, a 19th century movement in the 1850s, 1860s, were starting to discover and start incorporating the Upanishads and Buddhist traditions. Basically, Eastern religions were really significant to the Unitarian movement in the 19th century. And that idea of God not as something external to us, but of the idea of exploring within us to identify what is sacred, what is meaningful to us. And that's why I think when we're looking for the sacred and divine, some we may find it in nature, we may find it outside of ourselves, we may also find it deep within ourselves. Is that the same sense of the sacred? Is that the same sense of God? Is that a different manifestation of it, of the divine? I think it might be, but I think one thing that opens up the Unitarian Universalist idea of pluralism, we can find God, we can find the sacred, we can find the divine where we need it. And if you actually look at this stole, it kind of reflects that. These are different religious symbols. And can you put up the slide now, Bill? Thanks. You wonder where this actually came from. I got it from my last congregation. But what happened was, at the last congregation, we shared with a Presbyterian church, and they had a big cross over the sanctuary. And you can imagine, for Unitarian Universalism, some of us were concerned about that, because many of the LGBTQ community had been hurt quite badly with Christianity. So we developed this banner, and we pulled that up in front of the cross before we had worship, with the permission of the Presbyterian church that we shared. And we had it up one time, and I preached at the Presbyterian church, and they said they want to use it every Sunday as well. So there was a very, very liberal Presbyterian church. Thanks, Bill. That's good. So that banner was up there, but the woman who had made the banner came to me and said, "Would you like a stole around that?" And I went, "You bet." How many cookies do you need? And so she made that. But one of the things, we couldn't get, if you noticed on that, there was 12 different religious symbols, and the Unitarian Universalist chalice was in the middle because we're Unitarian Universalists. We get pride of place there. But I only put certain ones, but I only put these. I'm not tall enough to get all of these there, so I only put the religion symbols that were important to me. And each of them are, the chalice, of course. This is a happy humanist. Some of you may not be familiar with that. That's about religious humanism, which is my primary religious identity. Yin Yang, you're familiar with, the Christian cross. I grew up Presbyterian. This is the Baha'i faith, which I explored in the late 80s, early 90s. This is Om from the Hindu tradition. Islam. Judaism, I'm very influenced by 20th century, Jewish philosophers. I quote them a lot here. This is Buddhism, which I explored as a teenager. So these are all religions that have meant something to me in my life. And I've said to you before that I really think it's important for all of us to put a spiritual identity at the center of us, not a political identity, not an identity as simple as a parent or a son or a daughter, but a spiritual identity that's reflective of your value. I'm going to expand that into the idea of pluralism. It might be even better if we put spiritual identities at the center of it, because I know at different times in my life, different religions have spoken to me. When I was a teenager, Buddhism really helped me cope through college. The Baha'i in the late 80s was very, very meaningful to me. And Unitarian Universalism has really helped me get through the loss of both my parents. So I think really trying to put spiritual identities at the center of who we are, not political, and not simple identities about race is important, our gender is important, our sexual orientation is important, but not being defined by any one identity, and really trying to expand into that to real religious identities, spiritual identities that are meaningful for you. So that's your homework. Go and explore what spiritual identities are meaningful to you. Maybe you can create your own pictures around that.